Welcome to the Black-Liberation.Tech podcast, brought to you by Jordan Nuance LLC and hosted by Dr. Renee Jordan. This podcast is a accumulation of Dr. Jordan's dissertation work and her passion for empowering Latinas, Afro-Latinas, Black women, and girls to navigate the academic and professional worlds with confidence and success. Whether you're a mother or guardian guiding a child through grades 6 through 12, an undergrad or grad student, someone working on a dissertation or thesis, or simply looking to carve out your niche in the career landscape, this podcast is for you. Each episode, Dr. Jordan shares her story, offers invaluable advice, and provides practical coaching to help you thrive in school, work, and beyond. Join our community on patreon.com/Black-Liberation.Tech and become a member for as low as $5 per month. As a member, you'll gain exclusive access to live recordings, impromptu academic and career coaching, and a network of like-minded individuals committed to mutual support and success. You're also welcome to follow Black Liberation Tech on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Visit Black-Liberation.Tech for even more information on Dr. Jordan's adventure in Inglés o Español. Tune in, get inspired, and let's embark on this journey together. Welcome to Black-Liberation.Tech, where your success story begins. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Black-Liberation.Tech podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Renee Jordan, and today we're going to take a look at mentorship and letters of recommendation. Specifically, I want to share my story about how, at least parts of my story, about how I developed a mentorship in my Master's of Public Policy, Social Policy program, and how that mentorship ended up lasting 7 whole years after I graduated from the Master's of Public Policy program, and as a result carried me through my entire PhD program. I know that a lot of people are interested in having mentors, and there's an interest in not only having mentors that are experts in the field that you want to go into, but having a mentor that connects with you on more of a social level, so that it's not just strictly, oh, you need to take these classes, make sure you get this internship, make sure that you go to conferences and network. Those things are important, but it's also important if someone can help you with how to navigate the social aspects of those environments. And so in order to do so, you really have to develop a relationship. And sometimes that relationship has to start off in a formal setting, such as a classroom. Like I said, this professor was not a part of a specific initiative in terms of getting mentors to students. She was my professor. And so as a result of my engagement with her, I was able to not only get to know her better, but also the way things worked and how to get things done, if that makes sense. I also received valuable advice from her as it related to managing my time. And even when you're pushed against the clock and you know that you do good work and you're about to turn in something that doesn't represent you well, how to reach out. She told me how to reach out to the professor because she experienced something similar and said, hey, you know what? I really need another day. If I turn this in another day at a later date, then it will be a better product. And she was able to tell me that because she had a professor who shared with her, hey, you know what? You should have just asked for another day instead of turning in something that did not represent her well. And the key is you can't just ask for something like that when it's your first assignment, your first encounter with a professor. You have to have an understanding of their expectations, their requirements, and know them enough, or at least they've seen you and your work enough to know, hey, she really can do better. She's asking because she actually needs the time. So instead of sending in something that's not so good or great, asking for another day, even if that means a deduction. Sometimes that deduction would be better than the grade that you would have received if you turned in your rush work. So I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. Once again, we're going to talk about seeking out that mentorship that goes beyond the technical piece in terms of a checklist of things that you need to do in order to be successful, and include some of some of those social navigations that can help you along your way. And then the second part is going to talk about unexpected letters of recommendation. Now, I'll talk about that more when I get there. So, to start, I had a professor in my social policy class, and I really enjoyed her class. And when I read for her class, I took down notes. And those notes were reflective questions based upon the reading that we had. And so those notes not only included things as far as how did the readings connect with what was being taught in class, or how the readings connected to another reading, or how a reading connected to a current event. They also contain questions that I would ask the author if I had a chance. So what did they mean by X, Y, and Z? Did they actually take a look and see what others had to say about the matter? Or is the author perhaps making assumptions based upon the numbers that might not necessarily apply if they had more information about what was actually going on in that phenomenon? So, for example, if they see that, and this was an actual example that I gave in class, someone wrote about how they saw that there were fewer suspensions in a certain type of school compared to another type of school. And I won't go over the makeup of that because that's a conversation for another time. And so I said, well, I went to a certain type of school and there were fewer suspensions, but would the author know that the principal told the teachers that we're not suspending students? And as a result, you all have to figure out what to do in your classrooms in order to make sure that we're not suspending students. And so that brought a different perspective to the numbers that were being shown. So yes, the school had fewer suspensions, but what were the conditions of that school? What were teachers instructed? Did they receive instruction? Perhaps the schools that the author was writing about, those teachers didn't receive those instructions. But because I had an experience, I shared that experience in class. And so those are the types of things that I would bring to the classroom and to share. Not only did I share the current events because I was receiving the newsletters from the U.S. Department of Education at the time. And so whatever connections I could make in class with what was happening, I would definitely share and make those connections and ask those questions. Could those questions always be answered? No, but it showed that not only did I read, but I was interested in what was happening and curious about how it applied to different situations. And I shared my own experience. So that social policy class covered a whole lot of different aspects of social policy, and one of those was education. And so whenever possible, I put a plug in for education because that was my concentration when it came to social policy. And I wanted to know how things applied, how did they work. Once again, I moved all the way from Maryland to Georgia to go to school and to learn more about public policy. I didn't want to just get out the class what was on the syllabus. I wanted to know how it worked in the field that I was interested in. And so as a result of me being actively engaged in class and sharing my interests in terms of where I wanted to go after school or after the master's program specifically, that I wanted to get a PhD, I was able to hold conversations with the professor, not only during class with the group in terms of what was happening in our class discussions. So being able to comment and discuss and ask questions about what others were sharing in the classroom. But I was also able to have conversations before and after class with this professor. I also had her for my race and policy class, and that was an adventure in and of itself. And as a result of having these conversations and sharing what my interests were, and even complimenting her on how she structured our class, I told her, hey, I just want to let you know that I really like the way you have our class structured. I feel like I'm almost back in high school, if you will, because she would break things up and actually have us to do class work. And so I had not experienced that since probably high school, where things were broken down, where you were working on what you were learning in class in a way that required you to report out by the end of class what you learned as a result of applying what we read. So the class was not always lecture based. And so I said, this is good. You have very good teaching skills when it comes to this course. And she shared how her mother is an educator. And so I said, oh, I see the connection. And so she made us work during the class. And because I was actively engaged, because apparently I knew I was doing well, I didn't know how well I was doing in class because it wasn't like she was posting the grades and saying this many people got this grade, this many people got this grade. She gave me feedback and said, you know what, you were one of the students who really did well in my class. And I found that out like after the fact. And so that was encouraging. And as a result of us having these conversations and me sharing about where I wanted to go and how I wanted to get a PhD, I was able to ask for her help when it came to me completing my application for my PhD. And so she gave me feedback on my statements that I had to make with my application. And as a result, I was able to craft my statement so that it spoke well of my intentions and what I brought to the program and what I hoped to get out. And as a result of us developing that collegial type of relationship where we could not only discuss what was going on in class, but also my goals. She also shared with me her goals as it related to being a tenure track professor. And so the things that she needed to do in order to make tenure. And so that was a glimpse and gave me insight as far as what it would take if I were to go the tenure track position, as far as the expectations, what are you expected to do and deliver. And she even had a number of articles that she knew she needed to publish. She had a set number that she knew she needed to publish in order to make sure that she was setting herself up for success when it came for tenure and promotion. And so that's where it got collegial. So, okay, we're not just talking about what's happening in class. We're talking about what it is that we want to do next. And that allowed for more space and time to have the types of conversations and to gain an understanding of how you have to navigate things socially when it comes to tenure and promotion, when it comes to finding an advisor, or speaking with people about different opportunities that are available and how to get connected. And that took things a little further than a checklist, if you will. So she helped me with my application. I was accepted. She wrote a letter of recommendation to support my application because when I did the application, I had to enter in the names of those who would be submitting letters of recommendation. And so she did one. And not only did she help me and I was accepted, we kept in contact after that. And what our practice would be is that I would meet with her for lunch once a semester. And she said, and it was on her, and she said, no, I'm the professor, even though she's younger than me. And I was like, oh my gosh, this feels a little funny. I'm used to treating people who are younger than me. So this is different, but this is what she wanted to do, what she prided herself on, because that's what someone else did for her. They took her out for lunch and they paid. And so now it was her turn to do the same. And so we met for lunch once a semester and keep in touch with her through text essentially during the rest of the semester over, little small updates or things of that nature. She did help me with my first proposal in terms of the last edits that I made before submitting it to AERA. And that was greatly appreciated. My qualitative research professor, I took a special topics class with her, holes in qualitative research. And my final project, I decided it would be an AERA proposal. And so I was able to get feedback from my classmates as well as my professor. And that last bit of feedback that I received from my professor, I was able to go over it with my mentor at this point, and we were able to fine tune my proposal and get it submitted, and it was accepted. I also do want to say that one of my colleagues, while I was getting it together, he also assisted me with that proposal. So I had many eyes on my first proposal. It was a single author proposal, and it included classmates, it included my professor, it included my mentor, it also included one of my coworkers who reviewed for AERA before and had presented at AERA before. And so I valued his insight as well. And so I do want to recognize him as well. So I had many eyes on it. I let my advisor know because I was his graduate research assistant. So the proposal was based on data from the beta test. And so the data that I would update the findings on would be based on the first semester pilot of the program. And so that proposal was accepted, and that was very exciting. And I was able to share that news with her. And so whether it was proposal writing, whether it was updates on my graduate research assistantship that lasted 3 years, whether it was my 4 years of serving as an instructor. So a graduate teaching assistant, and that's the title that they gave, but I was the instructor of that online asynchronous course, giving her updates on how that was going along for 7 years after. That meant I knew her at least, I want to say my first class with her, I want to say it was in 2014. I don't think it was in 2013. I would have to go back and check. And so I took 2.5 years on my master's of public policy. So let's just say I at least knew her for at least one whole academic year. And then 7 years during my PhD program, that's a long time. And so that kind of mentorship comes by not only saying, hey, I need someone to help me. It also came because I was one of her cheerleaders. I was cheering her on, telling her she could do it. I was telling her, oh, it's okay to take a break. It's okay to take a vacation. It's okay. And she did. She went on her trips, and I was very glad to hear about them. And I was very glad to share my trips. I was on the conference train, if you will. I was going to conferences all over the place. And so I would share with her updates about that. She was getting data from the New York Department of Education or connections in New York. And so she had different collaborations going on there, and she was able to share those with me and how that was coming along. So I would say that if someone is looking for a mentorship where it goes past the checklist, past the goals, and includes some how do you navigate the space socially in terms of not only academia, in terms of classes and graduation requirements, but also how to get connected in a way where people are looking to work with you as a collaborator, how to get connected with people in a way that will cause them to want to support you, how to navigate spaces so that people see your work ethic and what you bring to the table. And if something comes up and you need an extra push or you need an exception to the rule, that they are more likely to give that to you. That kind of mentorship takes time. It takes give and take. So she was pouring into me, but I was also someone that she looked forward to speaking to because I was interested genuinely in how things were going for her and how she was achieving her goals. I could not necessarily give her advice on becoming a tenure track professor or a tenured professor, but I could share the different things I knew as it relate to delivering classes online. While I was in my PhD program, I was an instructional technologist, and as a result, I would share different tools and resources there with her. So I would share things from my profession that she might not have at her forefront, although they have their own Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. I could share nuggets there that she could implement, use, or consider, or be aware that those opportunities in terms of integrating technology were available and possible. And so it was a give and take relationship. And there was a level of interest in not only what I was doing, but also what she had in mind for herself in terms of her goals and social outings as well. And so, in order to have that type of mentorship, I do recommend investing time. I do recommend following up. I do recommend reaching out, and people will be more likely to hear you if it's not the first time that they hear you. Catch what I'm saying. When I said I needed help with my PhD program, it wasn't the first time that she heard that I was interested in getting into a PhD program. I mentioned that to her early on. It was not the first time that she heard me talk. So I was actively engaged in class. It was not the first time that she knew that I was interested in pursuing a high grade in her class. It was not me asking her to help me with my PhD application was not the first time that she saw my writing. And so she had a chance to experience me in terms of how I was as a scholar before I asked her to support me in continuing my journey as a scholar. And so not just engaging with her in class, but also my classmates. We had group projects in her classes, and we had to provide feedback on how our groups performed with each other. And so I conducted myself in a way so that when I asked for help, it was more of like, oh, sure, as opposed to, well, you know what? I would need to see your writing. I would need to see a sample of something. I would need to know what you're interested in. I would need to understand what your intentions are once you graduate. Like, these are the things that I would share and talk to her about even before I asked her to help me with my application, even before I asked her for a letter of recommendation. And so it's going to take engaging if you're in a classroom setting, even if that means, and I really did this, I wrote down my questions and I would say, hold on, let me get it right and read it off my paper. So if you get a little nervous about talking up in class, it's okay to read from your notes. Just take a note down and say, you know what? I had this question while I was reading, or I read something else from something else. Like, I read something else and I wonder if it's connected to this. Or I wonder if the author considered X, Y, and Z based on your experience and your perspective or other things that you have read. How can you engage in class so that your interests are addressed during class, so that class becomes more than the syllabus and actually you bring your interest to the table as opposed to waiting for someone else to ask about it. So I want to encourage you, if you're interested in developing a mentorship that also feeds into parts that go beyond checklist and more so social navigation and connection and developing more of a relationship with your mentor, then I would recommend seeing how you can engage with people ahead of time. Feel them out. Do you all mesh well? Will your personalities clash? Everybody might not be a good mentor for you. And so that takes time and you need to talk. So those are my recommendations there. Now, the second part, I'm actually going to keep it shorter. So the second part I wanted to talk about would be the unexpected letters of recommendations that I received to go with my application for a PhD program. And the first one I want to talk about is an adjunct professor. So we had an adjunct professor for our policy analysis class in my Master's of Public Policy program, and he worked for the Department of Justice. And so, because we all had different interests in the classroom, he would, of course, bring examples that related to the Department of Justice. But when we had assignments, we were to bring our interests as it related to policy to that assignment. And so mine was education, and specifically technology and technology literacy, digital literacies, etc. And so I shared in our final paper that we also had to turn around and present. I shared in my final paper, I talked about technology literacy of one of the counties in the metro Atlanta area. And one of the compliments that he gave to me, because he actually pretty much said something about everybody's paper And he shared that mine was educative. Like he learned something by the end of it. He wasn't aware of the technology requirement. That was a positive compliment and feedback that I received from him. And so when looking for letters of recommendation, because I received positive feedback from him that was specific to me, I knew that I could ask him to write me a letter of recommendation because he saw what I brought in my paper. It is possible to grade so many papers that things start to run together and you have a general idea as the instructor of how students performed. But in order to give feedback that is specific to an individual, that meant you paid attention enough or it struck you enough so that it resonated with you to a point where you wanted to say something. I won't say had to say anything because he didn't have to, but he actually wanted to say something and he did. And so I asked him if he would provide a letter of recommendation and he did. And that was great. Another unexpected, and I say it's unexpected because adjunct professors, not that they don't necessarily have to, and I won't even say that professors who are full-time professors at the institution have to write you a letter of recommendation. But adjunct professors, they might be there for one semester and not be back the following semester. So it's like, are you going to be able to catch them at a time where they are like, okay, this is a student that I've had and I want to see them be successful. Let me write them a letter of recommendation. And so that was an unexpected letter of recommendation. Although I was glad to receive feedback from him, and I figured he could write me a letter of recommendation because he remembered who I was. After grading everybody's papers, it wasn't necessarily guaranteed that he would take the time and do something extra. And so that was an unexpected letter of recommendation that I was very grateful for. And I appreciated a lot because when someone is able to speak well of you, that's priceless. And so I was glad that he did that. Another letter of recommendation that I received that was unexpected was from a professor who left the university to go teach in New York, which I understand was closer to home. And so he had moved on. And I was like, but he's one of the professors that I said, hey, I want to get a PhD. So I want to make sure I know this. He was one of my advanced statistics instructors. So like the last statistics class that I took was taught by him. And so I had to reach out to him at his new school. So I did a Google search and found him and found his new email address. And I sent him a request for a letter of recommendation and he agreed. Once again, I stuck out in class by talking. I made it clear. I said, hey, I want to go into a PhD program. So I want to make sure I understand this. I don't just want to get it right for the assignment. I want to understand it so that when I go to apply it to another scenario as a PhD student, I know what I'm talking about. And I know that I understand what I'm doing as opposed to just doing it. Because with statistics, it's one thing to perform the analysis, to do the linear regression. That's one thing. It's another thing to be able to communicate it. And I'm not going to say that that was the question that I was asking in class, but essentially that's the concept. I wanted to be able to understand it so that I could communicate it well and I'm not messing things up. And so because I spoke up in class, I participated, I engaged. We would go over the homework in class. I engaged then. I would ask questions. I would ask for clarity. And he was aware that I wanted to go into a PhD program. He said yes. And he wrote me a letter of recommendation. And I was grateful that he did so as well. Just think of it. The professor left the university. He was no longer at that institution, but he thought enough about me to agree to write a letter of recommendation. So once again, please speak up in class if you want letters of recommendations for people, even if it's asking questions to get clarity because you didn't understand something, or asking questions to follow up as a follow-up on what you've read in terms of what would you ask the author. Perhaps it's not necessarily something that the professor can answer because they're not the author, but when you ask that question, they might be able to direct you to someone else who addresses it and give you insight into additional readings that can help you along your way. Because a part of being a scholar, it's being able to make connections with the literature. Thank you for tuning in to the Black-Liberation.Tech podcast, brought to you by Jordan Nuance LLC and hosted by Dr. Renee Jordan. We hope today's episode has inspired you and provided valuable insights to help you navigate your academic and professional journey with confidence and success. Remember to like, subscribe, and share, as well as rate and review the podcast to help it become more discoverable. Whether you're guiding a child through grades 6 through 12, tackling undergraduate or graduate studies, working on a dissertation or thesis, or exploring your career options, this podcast is here to support you every step of the way. Join our community on patreon.com/Black-Liberation.Tech and become a member for as low as $5 per month. As a member, you'll enjoy exclusive access to live recordings, impromptu academic and career coaching, and a network of like-minded individuals committed to mutual support and success. Don't forget to follow Black-Liberation.Tech on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Visit Black-Liberation.Tech for even more information on Dr. Jordan's adventures, available in both English and Spanish. Stay inspired, stay empowered, and keep moving forward. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.